Hi, I'm Anna Jones. This is my new book, Easy Wins, and I'm going to cook you a recipe from it. The Jammy onion and salsa verde flatbreads. Salsa verde, to me, exists and is made so many times in my kitchen because of three things. Because of capers, because of cornichons, and because of mustard. And you will notice on the front of my book, there are capers and there are cornichons, which is in the vinegar chapter, and there is mustard, and also olive oil and herbs, obviously. But capers, cornichons, and mustard are three things that I cook with all the time. They are part of this kind of capsule pantry, as I call it. The 12 ingredients that I feel like I find it difficult to cook without. This is a really great way to get a lot of flavour into food. So, going with 4 onions, because we're going to cook these down until they're jammy and sticky and delicious. Been going Roscoff crazy this year, guys. So we are slicing the onions, a little bit of olive oil. This might look like a lot of onions, but if you're taking the time to cook down jammy onions for 20, 25, 30 minutes, then I always think it's worth doing like a decent batch. This is enough to feed 4 very generously, even 6. This is a really basic flatbread recipe. We need 400 grams of flour. This is going to make 4 flatbreads. And really, to make each flatbread, you need about 100 grams. And then we just need a sort of heaped teaspoon of baking powder. I just run a whisk through the flour just to make sure that there's no clumps of baking powder. Need a good pinch of salt. And mix that in. I'm actually going to use the brine from these capers because it will add some acidity. So we're adding 2 tablespoons, so you can see it fizzing a bit there. That's the reaction between the vinegar and the baking powder, which makes the dough kind of rise a little bit. Just going to check on my onions. You can see those onions really starting to go sort of sticky and breaking down, but we want to take them much further than that, so they're really jammy. Just going to add the water bit by bit. So you can start with a spoon and then bring the rest together in your hands. Don't be tempted to add too much water at the beginning. You can always add a little splash more if you need to as you go. We've kneaded that together into a kind of rough dough. And then I'm going to add some olive oil, which is just going to give it elasticity and richness. And then I'm going to knead that in. So that's had a little knead in the bowl, and then I'm just going to give it a little knead on here for a sec until you sort of have a smooth-ish dough. So that's good. It will sit and it will smooth out. It will sit and it will get a bit smoother as it sits. And then I'm just going to cover it over with a little tea towel. These onions are looking good, and the instinct might be to add oil now, but the oil is just going to raise the heat even more. So actually, when I want to kind of bring the heat down in a pan, something like this, I usually just add a little splash of water. So the dough's resting, and we're going to make a salsa verde. So you want about equal amounts of basil and parsley, and then you want about half that amount of mint. Gather everything together, and we're going to chop through the herbs. I find it quite fun chopping through the herbs, but chopping herbs is not your kind of fun, which I appreciate it might not be. Then, you know, you could use a food processor here if you wanted to. And next we're going to do some capers. So we've got little capers here. I've just chopped through those as well, so they're a bit smaller through the salsa verde. Classically in a salsa verde, you would add some cornichons. They kind of work with the capers and give you that vinegary, pickly feeling. I'm going to actually add some green olives instead, just because I sort of like the freshness of them, especially with the onions. So these are a nocellara olive. They're like a fresh, delicious, juicy green olive. I always buy olives with the stones still in. I always think they are better quality and generally more delicious. So this recipe is in the mustard chapter in Easy Wins. And whilst the capers and cornichons, if you use them, are a key part of salsa verde, I think mustard is really what makes it. I'm going pretty heavy on the mustard here because I want that heat, I want that punch. There's a little esky in the background. I want that heat, I want that punch, and I want this to kind of stand up to the sweetness of the jammy onions. So that's going in there. And then I want about a tablespoon as well of red wine vinegar, some olive oil. Salsa verde is a naturally kind of oily sauce. This is where you can use kind of a decent oil, because I want it to be sort of spoonable, drippable deliciousness of the olive oil. I always think that salsa verde does what sort of mint sauce does in British cooking. It cuts through. It's kind of that really bright, really herby, really verdant, acidic sauce that kind of hits so many different flavour notes in one go. Our onions are looking good. I've turned them off now. Other ways to use salsa verde while the griddle's heating up. You can toss it through pasta. You could put it in a toasted sandwich with cheese. You could put it on top of a flatbread. You could have it next to some rice. You could finish some roasted vegetables with it. Okay, so we've got our flatbread dough, which has been resting. You don't need to rest this for ages and ages. It's just got baking powder in this, so it's essentially kind of an instant dough. I just put a bit of flour on the surface and then roll it out until you have a nice finished flatbread. I'm going to pop our flatbread on. So you can see some bubbles kind of coming up, and that's exactly what you want. That's basically the baking powder puffing up and getting some air in there and making the flatbread light and fluffy. Gorgeous. This is nearly there, yes. So you can see the little charring on the sides. So next it's the ricotta. I mean, these are the most adorable thing I've ever seen. They're tiny little ricotta hearts. I'm gonna put one on there. Look at that. Hilarious, unnecessary, but also brilliant. So I'm just gonna season the ricotta with a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper. Our flatbread is done, which is puffy and light and cooked and delicious. So we're kind of treating this flatbread a bit like a sort of pizza, I guess, but also not really a pizza. We're just gonna use it as kind of the base for all of our delicious things. We're gonna start off with the ricotta, which I'm gonna kind of just gently spread on here. So this ricotta is just like a really neutral base for our onions, which are gonna bring sweetness, and our salsa verde, which is gonna bring everything else. And I'm gonna sort of dot the onions over this ricotta, and then a bit of our salsa verde. So I'm gonna just add a tiny little bit more oil, just because why not? I'm gonna take some little bits of herbs. You don't necessarily need to do this, but it looks nice. And it's kind of fresh and bright and delicious for spring. And actually, if you had the salsa verde and the onions made, you could put the whole thing together in like 10 minutes. Should we have some? Let's have some. Verdant, bright, green, grassy, springy, salty, briny, capery.